Chapter 12. The Courage of Children Who Opposed Nazis. Earlier I mentioned how a Nazi headmaster said that men were better at persistent propaganda than women. The more I traveled, the more convinced I became that what he said was amply borne out by what I saw and heard. It was apparently true that there was much more individual breaking away from the Hitler Girls movement than from the boys' organization. Of course, this was partly due to the fact that it was much more serious for a boy's future than for a girl's to be outside the party. But here are 4 pictures drawn from very different homes in different parts of Germany, which all indicate the kind of difficulty and show the courage of a quite young generation. In the senior form of a very large girls' school in Silesia, an ardent Nazi teacher had been giving a lesson on the Treaty of Versailles, which she described as the most vindictive and brutal treaty of modern times. At the end of the class, a 15-year-old girl said, "Excuse me, Fraulein Schmidt, what sort of treaty do you think the Germans would have made if they had won the war?" Fraulein Schmidt was furious, and the girl was sent out of the room. That evening, at the home of this girl, 5 other schoolgirls met, and their mother told me spent 2 hours in hilarious and ribald mirth, but would not tell her what they were doing. Later they borrowed a large sheet of drawing paper, red sealing wax and ribbon, and wrote out a long document. It was only later that the mother learned that her daughter, together with the other 5, was punished for drawing up the sort of treaty Germany might have made against England and France, and had left a note with it to add that they had found the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk a great help. They had put this document on the teacher's desk. The mother was rather worried, although she admired her daughter's pluck, and said to her, "But you must remember, even if you are not Nazis, you are good young Germans." "Ach," said the daughter, "we are bored young Germans. That teacher goes on with her propaganda till we nearly go mad. Now we hope she will change a little. Anyhow, it was great fun to make her so angry." It was the simple house of a Lutheran pastor in East Pomerania. His little daughter of 11 looked younger than her years and very frail, and I was interested in her courage when, just before evening prayers, at which we used to sing a hymn, she said, "Daddy, can I open the window? Because you said in church today we should let other people know that we are as proud to sing our Christian hymns as the Nazis are to sing their songs." So the window was opened, and the little girl and her small brother of 6 sang lustily, "Ein feste Burg ist unser Gott." The small boy insisted on standing by the open window and made a pretty sight, as with a defiance he did not understand, but felt was the appropriate mood, he sang Lutheran hymns into the dark night. After prayers, Esther, as she was called, said, "Shall we tell you about our secret society?" Then, with all the enthusiasm of a small schoolgirl for a secret society, with secret pledges and secret signs, she told me she had started an Evangelisches Bund, and had got 37 members in 3 different schools. They were all pledged to resign from the Hitler Girls during the ensuing 6 months, and many had done so already, and they also had a scheme for Bible reading and prayer. While Esther was talking to me, her small brother was on the floor playing with his bricks. He was building a street scene, and in addition to trams and motors, he had people on his pavements. Suddenly, to the astonishment of everyone, Fritz spat into the middle of his street scene. "Whatever are you doing?" said his mother. "It's a Jew," said Fritz. "What do you mean, Fritz?" Again the emphatic reply. "That man in my street is a Jew, and the teacher at school said we should spit when we passed Jews in the street." In consternation, his mother and sister reproved him, though it was obviously true that Fritz, as yet anyhow, had no anti-Semitic feelings, but was delighted to find authority for an action that caused so much consternation. Later that evening, I sat talking to the father and mother. The father had already been to the school to protest, and I think he felt satisfied that the headmaster, though a Nazi, did not approve of anything as crude as the instruction given by his junior master. "But," said the father, "I little thought we should have to watch even the babies, lest they get contaminated by this poison. It is a tricky business bringing up children in this country today." "Where can Hilda be?" said her grandfather, as lunch was nearly over and she had not arrived. "She knew that you were coming to lunch specially because she had a half-holiday, and that you were going to take her out," he said, addressing Hilda's father and mother. Hilda was the only daughter of a retired officer who was a large landowner in Westphalia, and whose 4 sons were all in the army. During the school term, Hilda lived with her grandparents in order that she could attend school in the town. Today, however, was Whit Monday, and her parents had come over to lunch, because Hilda had said the school was all being taken to the Lutheran church in the morning, and that after the service was over, she would have a holiday for the rest of the day. She promised to be home well before lunch. Turning to me, her father said, "You will find our daughter has grown a great deal. Unfortunately, she has joined the Hitler Maids, which distresses us, but she now has rather socialistic ideas and thinks she should go in with the other girls. Lately, she was very upset because a very famous Protestant pastor, Dr. Niemöller, was sent to prison. Hilda knew him, and I think it gave her first shock to the idea that perhaps she would not agree very long with the Nazis, but we shall see. My wife and I think it is better she should make her own decisions." As he finished speaking, the door burst open, and in came Hilda. Without a word of greeting to anyone, she stood, one hand still holding the door handle, while with the other she pulled her cap off a mop of lovely golden brown hair. With flushed cheeks she announced, "I have forced my way into the presence of Herr Koch at his own lunch table, and I told him that I and many like me will leave the party, and that we hate him, and if he goes on like that we shall hate Hitler too in the end. And I told him he could send me to prison if he liked." Her mother turned pale, but the old grandfather said slowly, "But Hilda, what do you mean? Herr Koch is the head of all the Nazis in this province and has guards at his front gate. No one can get in." "Well, I did," said Hilda. "I treated the guards as though I were a princess and they had to do what I wanted, and somehow it worked. I then got past the maid and finally the wife. She was the most difficult, but she had to go and tell her hideous husband that I would not wait till his lunch was over. I must see him at once, so he said I could go to the dining room. You can do things if you are angry enough, nicht wahr, Papa?" said Hilda. Her father, who had remained silent until now, was not lacking in courage. He stared first with complete amazement and then with delight at his very beautiful daughter of 15 1/2. She suddenly appeared to him in an entirely new light. Hitherto she had always been the baby girl in a house that was predominantly male and military. Then his surprise gave way to a good laugh as he turned to me and said, "I think in England you would probably say, 'Well played, Hilda?' Anyhow," he continued, "come in and shut the door and tell us exactly what you are talking about. Remember, we don't know." Hilda sat on the back of the sofa and told her story. "First of all," she said, "when I got to school I found my friend Ingrid terribly upset because her father, who is not only the most loved pastor in this town, but a most courageous ex-officer, the stories of whose bravery in the last war are known in the whole school where he gives religious instruction, had been sent to prison. By order of Herr Koch, the Gestapo called at 7 o'clock this morning at his house to arrest him. They said they would only allow him time to put on some clothing. The pastor replied, 'I will call my family, because we always have family prayers before we start doing anything in the day, and even before going to prison, it would be a good idea to keep this Christian custom.' Ingrid says even the Gestapo men seemed embarrassed, and all the family and the maids sang as well as they could. It must have looked strange with only her mother properly dressed and the Gestapo men standing in the doorway. That was bad enough, said Hilda. But when the school got to church, we found that the preacher was one of these German Christians, and he did nothing but talk against the Jews, and also against Christian pastors who did not agree that Adolf Hitler is like a second Christ. It was terrible, Grandpapa, what he said, and if that is what the party does, I will not belong to it, and I decided I would go and tell Herr Koch. I have told him that I will write to Hitler myself, and that my eldest brother, who is an officer, will give my letter to Hitler because he knows him and is in Berlin. And I would tell Hitler that I and lots more girls were keen members of the Nazi youth groups, but that we cannot belong to it if he sends such a terrible man to Westphalia. Breathless after this long outburst, Hilda stopped for a moment, but not long enough for anyone to say anything, before she turned to her father and said, "Hugh, Papa, can't you do something about the pastor? He was such a good officer and loves Germany, and he has been sent to prison because he is a Christian and because he said it was wicked to treat the Jews as the Nazis do." Then suddenly laughing, she added, "None of the girls thought I could get past the guards. Can I go round and see Ingrid and tell her?" Her old grandmother, who had remained completely silent till then, said, "Well, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea if you tidied your hair and had some lunch, and as you have talked till all our coffee is cold, we will have some fresh made." After Hilda had left the room, the old lady, who was obviously proud of her granddaughter, but at the same time very perturbed, turned to her son and said, "I found it difficult enough when you and your brothers got into trouble by fighting the village boys who were communists. But what you are going to do with a daughter who starts fighting with a lot of Nazi gangsters, I just don't know." "I am thankful," said the father, turning to me, "that I have retired and do not come into contact with the Nazis. It is a good sign when the younger generation, like my daughter, rebel. I may be optimistic, but I think a lot of the bad things that are happening are due to the fact that the men at the top are ignorant and vulgar. I really don't know what to make of it all, because undoubtedly Hitler has done some good things. This city was a nightmare of unemployment, and anyhow we should have had some sort of revolution. Perhaps even Nazis are better than communists, who also put their clergy in prisons. Naturally, my sons are glad that there is once more a chance of a career in the army, and they know they owe that to Hitler. I hope somehow when the army is strong enough, and when people have got tired of the propaganda, that the excesses that come in every revolution may also die down here." A quiet voice came from the depths of the armchair into which the old grandfather had sunk. "You deceive yourself, Karl," he said. "While you sleep, the Nazis are going to get such a control of this country that we can never get free again, unless we have a war or some terrible internal upheaval." Then turning to me, he said, "I am an old man now, and I have perhaps more time to think than my son, and certainly more time than my grandsons who are so busy with their training in the army. I am convinced that the apathy in this country, which is largely due to exhaustion from the last war and all that came after, is going to mean that we have let something evil, so evil, get hold here that Germany will now face 50 years of dictators and wars to get free from it. We are trying to compromise with evil, so that we may have an easier time now, but it is not possible, and we shall pay bitterly for our apathy and our compromise. Of course, as my son says, it is true that in Russia there is no freedom, but that is only so because in spite of some good things, Russians are not used to freedom. But in this country, we are turning our back on freedom we have had, which is a terrible thing to do." "I am afraid," said the son, "our English guest will find it hard to judge what is happening here, as we all say different things. The fact is, we are very confused in this new situation." "And our confusion," said the old man, almost in anger as he put out the stump of his cigar, "will be our damnation." At that point, Hilda came back for her lunch just as we all rose to leave the table. The old man, glancing at his granddaughter with pride, said, I'll stay and see the child gets into no more trouble till she has had her lunch, and then we will join you in the garden." Lest I should appear to overemphasize the power of the girls to resist, here is a most moving story of a boy of 16 who lived in Frankfurt and was the son of a retired civil servant, a well-known engineer and prominent Protestant layman. Johann was a quiet and rather diffident boy, with a great deal more interest in scholarship than in sport. He was extremely clever, and had inherited his father's love of reading. His parents were strongly anti-Nazi, but decided they would not forbid their children to join the local Hitler Jugend groups if they wished. "In fact," said his father, "I am quite sure in the end Johann will disagree as much as I do when he sees what it all means, but he had far better discover that for himself. In the meantime, it will do him no harm to go on their marches and to their camps, for he does not take enough outdoor exercise and works too hard. As you see, he does not look strong." At first, Johann used to talk about the Hitler Jugend and what they were doing, and seemed very happy. He had taken great interest in being asked to help lead a study group on German colonial demands, as all the boys in this and many other schools were being specially trained in this. But by degrees, Johann became more silent. He had obviously discovered that the Nazi master who was in charge of his study group was more concerned with propaganda than with truth. He had in fact been to a public library and had looked up many things about the British Empire and found how much of the stuff they were being taught was both unjust and untrue. Then in November 1938 came the terrible attack on the Jews. Late one winter evening, Johann was on his way home from school with some of his friends and had seen some helpless old Jews being beaten up in the street by some young SS men. Most of his schoolmates had joined in and jeered. Johann arrived home looking deadly pale and saying he did not want any supper, shut himself up in his room. "It was very hard to watch him after that," went on his father. "We would never discuss anything with him, but we knew there was a terrible conflict in his mind about it all. Up to now he had always hoped to stay an extra year at school, but now he gave us hints, though without saying why, that he would like to leave soon. It was quite obvious that he was very unhappy, but we decided that unless he discussed it with us or the pastor, we would say nothing. He looked ill, and for the first time in his life, he began to stutter. Now I must tell you what happened a few weeks ago. It was a bitterly cold winter's afternoon just a week before Christmas. The school bell rang, and 300 boys flocked into the school assembly hall for the closing ceremony for that term. In front, on the platform, there was a large lighted Christmas tree, and the custom was that the master addressed all the boys, and that then they had Christmas carols before separating for the holidays. That day, there was now the familiar sight of a Nazi Gauleiter, crude and unlettered, sitting on the platform with the headmaster. The master said just a word or two, and then the Gauleiter got up, and after a eulogy of the Führer, let out a great diatribe against the Jews, and as usual urged the boys not to care for learning but for physical strength and toughness. It was a vulgar speech, with many coarse jokes, and though most of the boys seemed to enjoy it, the headmaster looked ill at ease. The Gauleiter then suggested they should sing some of the Nazi songs, and chose one of the most crude anti-Jewish songs of the party, ending with the famous Horst Wessel. One of the masters sitting on the platform noticed the tense white face of Johann as he stood in the second row of boys, silent throughout all this proceeding, with his eyes fixed on the Christmas tree, which seemed to belong to another world. The headmaster rose to give the word of dismissal, and as he did so, there was a sound of scuffle as Johann pushed past the boys in front of him and shot up the platform steps to the piano, which the young Nazi master in uniform had just left. Johann, who was a good pianist, sat down and began to play the favorite German carol, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. It all happened in a second and threw everyone into a strange bewilderment. Some boys looked round. Others began to hum the tune under their breath. The bullying Gauleiter stared at the slender, pale-faced boy who now sat silent at the piano. The fear he had momentarily lost had returned, and he seemed unable to move. The headmaster dismissed the boys, and then, as he passed off the platform with the Gauleiter and the other masters, he patted Johann on the head and said, as though wishing to appease the Gauleiter without being unkind to the boy, "Poor boy, he's got it so much in his blood that he cannot get rid of it, but he will in time." By way of explanation, he told the Gauleiter that Johann's uncle was a famous theologian, and that they were a very religious family. Johann then made a dive for the back door, and running through the snow and bitter wind with no coat and without the books he wanted for the holidays, reached home and locked himself in his bedroom. We were distressed, but greatly relieved when an hour later one of the older masters, known to us as an anti-Nazi, arrived, bringing his coat and books. He told us the story of his courage. After that, our son was able to take us into his confidence, and when he returned from a week's stay in Bavaria with this master who was his friend, he had gained strength and resolution, and sent in his resignation from the Hitlerjugend. "Of course," said his master, "his struggle has been bitter because he knows the cost. Unfortunately now, a boy, however clever he is, and Johann is brilliant, is not allowed to go to the university unless he shows himself a good party member. It is a terrible blow to him to give up the university, but I try to comfort him by telling him that after he has done his year in the labor corps and his military service, this madness may have passed from Germany, and he may yet get to the university. Certainly, he is happier now and stronger, even with this disappointment."